My mother called me worthless after Dad's will. I found a forgotten document. The result was shocking. For 20 years, my family treated me, Eliza, like a housemaid and a scapegoat. I was the responsible one, the one who sacrificed my college fund to keep our family's lucrative commercial real estate business afloat. While my two older brothers, the golden children, partied and failed at life, I ran the company's day-to-day operations and took care of my ailing parents. I was constantly criticized, constantly hated, and constantly reassured by my father, "Eliza, you are the future of this company. It will all be yours." I stayed because of that promise. That promise turned out to be the cruelest joke. When my father died, they revealed a final, brutal truth. I was left with nothing, and my brothers were given the entire $10 million portfolio. They laughed and told me to get out. But they forgot that I had been keeping the books for a decade, and I knew a fatal, secret liability hidden in the company's paperwork. A liability I was about to weaponize to take everything back. My parents owned 5 prime commercial properties in the city. The portfolio was worth over $10 million. My brothers, Mark and David, never worked a day in the business. Mark was a failed musician living off Dad's credit cards. David was perpetually launching a startup that never launched. Yet every holiday they were showered with praise, while I was told I still had so much to learn. 7 years ago, my mother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. My father suffered a stroke 2 years later. I quit my part-time degree and became their full-time caregiver and the company's de facto CEO. I managed the tenants, collected the rent, and handled all the medical scheduling. My brothers visited maybe twice a year, usually just to check if Dad was still writing checks. When Dad finally passed away last year, I was devastated, but I was also ready to fulfill the promise and officially take over the business I had been running. The will reading was the most painful hour of my life. The family lawyer, clearly uncomfortable, read the final wishes. The cash and minor assets were split evenly. Then came the bombshell regarding the real estate portfolio. All commercial properties, business accounts, and management control shall be divided equally between Mark and David, the lawyer read, avoiding my eyes. The residual estate, excluding the properties, shall pass to Eliza. The residual estate was a $5,000 piece of old farm equipment. My brothers smirked. My mother, still mentally present enough to be cruel, simply whispered, "We knew you'd just mess it up anyway, dear." I was shattered. I confronted the lawyer, demanding to know why Dad had betrayed me. The lawyer simply showed me a legally binding quitclaim deed signed a year before Dad died, transferring ownership of the 5 properties into a revocable trust controlled entirely by Mark and David. Dad had cut me out while I was still changing his sheets. Mark stood up, smiling wide. "We've decided you're done here, Eliza. You're fired. You have 24 hours to clear out your desk and move your stuff out of the caretaker's cottage. You get nothing." I was scared straight out of the building. Homeless, jobless, and completely disinherited by the people I had sacrificed my youth for. As I sat in a cheap motel room staring at the ceiling, I realized my emotional rage was useless. I needed information. I needed a weapon. I remembered the early days of the business. 10 years ago, when the portfolio was first formed, my father, always paranoid, made me sign one single, forgotten document before I started managing the accounts. The family had forgotten about it, but I knew exactly where the original copy was hidden. What was this forgotten, legally ironclad contract, and how did it give me the power to seize all 5 properties from my brothers before they could liquidate the $10 million assets? I had nothing left but my memory and a cheap motel room. My brothers thought they had won, but they didn't know the most dangerous secret of the business, the paper trail. I remembered that 10 years ago, when we acquired the largest of the 5 commercial properties, a former industrial warehouse, my father was terrified of hidden environmental contamination. He created a highly specific legal document, a personal liability indemnification agreement, a PLIA. This agreement made me personally liable for any environmental cleanup costs related to that single property, specifically because I was the only one managing the physical location. My father signed it, I signed it, and he hid the original copy in a safe deposit box that only I had the key to. The family lawyer, years later, had simply relied on the quitclaim deed to transfer the assets to the brothers' trust, but they never realized that the PLIA, the liability, was an entirely separate contract that remained legally tied to my personal finances. This wasn't just a legal oversight, this was a weapon. I retrieved the PLIA from the bank vault. It was a pristine 2-page contract signed and notarized by my father and me. I then contacted the city's Environmental Regulation Department. I knew that the old warehouse property had a known unresolved issue with underground chemical leakage, a problem Dad had been ignoring for years because the cleanup was estimated at $1.5 million. I anonymously tipped off the city, providing them with internal reports I had filed years earlier. Within a week, the city issued a massive environmental cleanup order and an immediate fine against the owner of record of the property. The owner of record was now my brother's trust, but the ultimate financial burden, the $1.5 million cleanup debt, was still legally mine according to the PLIA. I went to my own lawyer, a sharp litigation specialist named Ms. Chen. She reviewed the PLIA and the new cleanup order. "Eliza, this is brilliant," Ms. Chen said, her eyes wide. "Your brothers own the asset, but you own the liability. You can legally claim that because the debt is still yours, the property must be secured to protect your interest from financial ruin. We will file a lawsuit seeking immediate indemnification and place a massive equitable lien on all 5 properties in the trust." A lien is a legal claim against an asset to secure a debt. If the debt wasn't paid, the properties couldn't be sold, refinanced, or developed. The $1.5 million liability effectively froze the entire $10 million portfolio. The lawsuit was served. My brothers, Mark and David, laughed it off. Mark called me screaming, "This is harassment. You're fired. We'll have you arrested for filing a frivolous suit." I remained calm. "Mark, you own the asset, but the city just issued a $1.5 million cleanup order that the PLIA says is legally my debt. You need to release me from that contract and pay the cleanup immediately. If you don't, the lien stays on all your properties, and you won't make a single penny." They ran to their lawyer, who confirmed the chilling truth. The PLIA was a forgotten separate contract. My father, in his rush to disinherit me and transfer the assets to the trust, had created a fatal legal loophole. He had transferred the golden goose, but left the ticking financial bomb tied to my name. My brothers realized they couldn't access their $10 million inheritance without paying my $1.5 million debt. They refused. They believed they could outlast me. Mark and David decided to fight, trying to delay the lien in court while secretly attempting to sell the 4 clean properties to raise cash. How did I use a special legal order, the lis pendens, to legally block the sale of all 5 properties and force my arrogant brothers to come to the negotiating table on my terms? My brothers, Mark and David, were furious. They had the title to $10 million in assets, but my equitable lien for $1.5 million had effectively put a legal chokehold on their entire portfolio. Their strategy was simple: delay the court case, bleed me dry of legal fees, and secretly sell off the 4 clean properties, the ones without the industrial environmental debt, before the court could rule. They figured they could raise enough cash to pay the debt and keep the profits. But they underestimated how meticulous I had been.
Frank had anticipated this move. Because our lawsuit directly challenged the ownership and the financial standing of the properties within the trust, Ms. Chen immediately filed a lis pendens, notice of pending litigation, against all 5 properties in the public record. A lis pendens is a devastating legal weapon in real estate. It acts like a giant red flag. Once it's filed, any title insurance company or bank looking to finance a sale sees a legal cloud over the property. No legitimate buyer will touch it, and no bank will lend against it. The properties were officially frozen. Mark and David were ecstatic when they found a private investor willing to buy 2 of the clean properties for $4 million cash. They thought they had bypassed my lien. They signed the contract, scheduled the closing, and prepared to celebrate. But the title company called them back an hour later. "We can't close the deal," the title agent told them. "There is a lis pendens filed against the property noting a claim of indemnification related to an industrial liability in the trust. Until that claim is resolved, the property is legally unsellable." The sale collapsed. Mark and David's initial laughter turned into screaming rage. They had the gold, but they couldn't spend it. They were asset rich, but cash poor, and they were bleeding money trying to fight my lawsuit. The brothers then went on the attack. They filed a countersuit claiming the PLIA was fraudulently induced by my father and me to sabotage their inheritance. They tried to drag my frail, elderly mother into court to testify that I had manipulated my father. This was the peak of the emotional abuse. They were willing to humiliate their own mother in public court just to win this financial war. But my lawyer wasn't playing games. Ms. Chen calmly presented evidence showing that the PLIA was notarized and signed 10 years ago, long before my father was ill. She also presented the environmental cleanup order from the city, confirming the $1.5 million liability was real and immediate. The judge looked at the brothers' lawyer and said, "Your clients possess a $10 million asset portfolio. They have a known, verifiable $1.5 million debt currently blocking the sale. Your client's attempt to dissolve this legal claim without paying the debt is frivolous. Until they fulfill the indemnification owed to the plaintiff, the lis pendens remains." The brothers were trapped. Their legal fees were mounting, the tenants were getting nervous, and they couldn't even mortgage the properties. They finally ran out of options and agreed to meet at the negotiation table. I walked into that meeting not as the emotional crying sister they expected, but as the meticulous executive they had underestimated. The brothers were arrogant, offering me a mere $50,000 to go away. I laughed in their faces. "My terms are simple," I stated. "You have 2 choices. 1, pay the $1.5 million cleanup fee, pay my legal fees, and pay me $500,000 for the 7 years of unpaid CEO work I performed as CEO. 2, transfer the largest, most valuable commercial property, the one without the environmental debt, worth $3.5 million, back to me, and I will release the lien on the remaining 4 properties and absorb the $1.5 million debt myself." They were speechless. They had to give me either cash or 1/3 of their inheritance. The brothers had to choose between crippling debt and losing a massive portion of their legacy. They tried one last desperate legal move, but they failed. Which choice did Mark and David make? How much did the final settlement cost them? And what was the ultimate, non-financial revenge I exacted on my mother, who had called me worthless?
Mark and David hated the idea of giving me cash. To them, giving me money meant admitting I was worth something. After a week of agonizing, spiteful deliberation, they chose option 2. They would transfer the prize property, the $3.5 million commercial building, to me, in exchange for me releasing the lien on their remaining 4 properties and assuming the $1.5 million environmental debt. They thought they were still winning. "She's taking a $1.5 million liability," Mark scoffed. "We still walk away with over $6 million clean." The handover took place in Miss Chen's office. My brothers refused to look at me, their faces twisted with hatred.
as they signed the final deed of transfer, officially handing me the keys to a $3.5 million asset, I felt 7 years of criticism and sacrifice lift from my shoulders. "One final matter," Miss Chen stated calmly. "As part of the settlement, all accrued legal fees for Eliza's representation must be paid by the trust. That comes to $485,000. My brothers exploded. They hadn't factored the legal fees into their escape plan, but they were trapped. If they refused, I would refuse to release the lease pendants, freezing all their assets again. They had no choice. They signed the check. I walked out of that office with the deed to a prime, debt-free commercial building and a check for almost $500,000 to cover my legal war. Mark and David walked out with 4 properties, but with a severely damaged trust, immediate cash flow problems, and a massive debt they now had to pay the lawyers for. They had lost their most valuable asset to the sister they called worthless. But my revenge was not yet complete. I still had one score to settle, one final debt to collect, the emotional debt owed by my mother. My mother, the one who looked me in the eye and said, "We knew you'd just mess it up anyway," was still living in the caretaker's cottage adjacent to one of the commercial properties now owned by the brothers' trust. Using the cash from my legal fee reimbursement, I anonymously placed a bid on a small foreclosed duplex directly across the street from the cottage. I bought it, renovated it, and moved in. My mother was forced to watch me, the despised daughter, rebuild my life right across the street. Then came the final, brutal move. I knew my brothers, now facing cash crunch, would try to liquidate assets quickly. I waited until they put the caretaker's cottage up for sale. It was priced low for a quick cash closing. I instructed Miss Chen to create an anonymous shell company and submit an aggressive cash offer. We closed on the cottage within 2 weeks. I was the new owner. The day the papers finalized, my brothers went ballistic. They screamed that I had interfered with the sale. They threatened to sue. I simply had my lawyer serve them and my mother with an eviction notice. My mother, who called me worthless, received a letter from my company stating she had 30 days to vacate the property. I didn't keep the cottage. I immediately listed it for rent to a happy young family. I didn't want the bricks. I wanted the humiliation. The mother who taught me that love was conditional and financial power was everything was forced to move out of the home she expected to die in, all because of the one daughter she disinherited. My brothers struggled to manage the remaining properties, constantly facing legal challenges due to their incompetence. I, however, became the successful property owner they always denied I could be. My $3.5 million building is now my home base. The lesson: when facing financial betrayal by family, emotions are a distraction. Contracts are power. Don't fight the will, fight the liability. Use specific, forgotten legal documents, like an indemnification agreement or a side letter, to find a flaw in the asset transfer itself. Don't be afraid to utilize devastating legal tools like the lease pendants to freeze assets and force surrender. The most satisfying victory is not just the money you take back, but the systemic destruction of the financial world your abusers thought they controlled.